Perhaps one of the most contentious issues taking place in the Middle East today, which has to some degree spilled over to the church, has everything to do with what is known as the biblical line of promise. That is, God acted to separate the world's population from that time forward into two distinct people groups. Abraham and his offspring would be one group. Everyone else would be the other. And the purpose was to establish a group of people separated out from all others to be those whom God uses to bring about his plan of redemption that would, in the end, benefit everyone. And once Abraham and God entered into this arrangement via a formal covenant, this new group was eventually known as the Hebrews, loosely meaning one who crossed over. Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 23. Genesis chapter 23, and we're going to read all of this week's Torah portion. Starting with Genesis chapter 23. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. These were the years of Sarah's life. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, also known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn Sarah and weep for her. Then he got up from his dead one and said to the sons of Het, I'm a foreigner living as an alien with you. Let me have a burial site with you so that I can bury my dead wife. And the sons of Het answered Abraham, Listen to us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us, so choose any of our tombs to bury your dead. Not one of us would refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Abraham got up and bowed before the people of the land, the sons of Het, and spoke with them. If it's your desire to help me bury my dead, then listen to me. Ask Ephron, the son of Zohar, to give me the Cave of Machpelah, which he owns, the one at the end of his field. He should sell it to me in your presence at its full value. Then I will have a burial site of my own. Now, Ephron the Hittite was among the sons of Het, and he gave Abraham his answer in the presence of the sons of Het who belonged to the ruling council of the city. No, my lord, listen to me. I'm giving you the field with its cave. I'm giving it to you. In the presence of my people, I give it to you. Abraham bowed before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in their hearing, Please be good enough to listen to me. I will pay the price of the field. Accept it from me, and I will bury my dead there. But Ephron answered Abraham, My lord, listen to me. A plot of land worth 400 silver shekels. What is that between you and me? Just bury your dead. Abraham got to the point of what Ephron had said, so he weighed out for Ephron the amount of money he had specified. In the presence of the sons of Het, 400 silver shekels of the weight accepted among merchants. Thus the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which is by Mamre, the field, its cave, all the trees in it all and around it were deeded to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the sons of Het, who belonged to the ruling council of the city. Then Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah by Mamre, also known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And the field and its cave had been purchased by Abraham from the sons of Het as a burial site which would belong to him. Well, by now, Abraham was old, advanced in years, and Adonai had blessed Abraham in everything. And Abraham said to the servant who had served him the longest, who was in charge of all he owned, Put your hand under my thigh, because I want you to swear by Adonai, God of heaven and God of earth, that you will not choose a wife for my son from among the women of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but that you will go to my homeland, to my kinsmen, to choose a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant replied, Well, suppose the woman isn't willing to follow me to this land. Must I Then bring your son back to the land from which you came." And Abraham said to him, "See to it that you don't bring my son back there. Adonai, the God of heaven, who took me away from my father's house, away from the land I was born in, who spoke to me and swore to me, 'I will give you this land to your descendants,' he will send his angel ahead of you, and you are to bring a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is unwilling to follow you, then you are released from your obligation under my oath. Just don't bring my son back there." Well, the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning the matter. And then the servant took 10 of his master's camels, all kinds of gifts from his master, got up and went to Aram Nahayarim, to Nahor's city. And toward the evening, when the women go out to draw water, he had the camels kneel down outside the city by the well. And he said, "Adonai, God of my master Abraham, please let me succeed today. Show your grace to my master Abraham. Here I am, standing by the spring as the daughters of the townsfolk come out to draw water. I will say to one of the girls, 'Please lower your jug so that I can drink.' If she answers, 'Yes, drink, and I will water your camels as well,' then let her be the one you intend for your servant Yitzhak. This is how I will know that you have shown grace to my master." Before he had finished speaking, Rivkah, the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her jug on her shoulder, and the girl was very beautiful, a virgin, never having had sexual relations with any man. And she went down to the spring and filled her jug and came up. The servant ran to meet her and said, "Please, give me a sip of water from your jug to drink." "Drink, my lord," she replied, and immediately lowered her jug onto her arm and let him drink. And when she was through letting him drink, she said, "I will also draw water for your camels until they have drunk their fill." She quickly emptied her jug into the trough, then ran again to the well to draw water, and kept on drawing water for all of his camels. The man gazed at her in silence, waiting to find out whether Adonai had made his trip successful or not. And when the camels were done drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing 1/5 of an ounce and 2 gold bracelets weighing 4 ounces and asked, "Whose daughter are you? Tell me, please, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" And she answered, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son Milcah bore to Nahor," adding, "We have plenty of straw and fodder and room for staying overnight." And the man bowed his head and prostrated himself before Adonai. And then he said, "Blessed be Adonai, God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his faithful love for my master, because Adonai has guided me to the house of my master's kinsman." The girl ran off and told her mother's household what had happened. Now Rivkah had a brother named Lavan. And when he saw the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists besides, and when he heard his sister Rivkah's report of what the man had said to her, he ran out to the spring and found the man standing there by the camels. "Come on in," he said, "you whom Adonai has blessed. Why are you standing outside when I have made room in the house and prepared a place for the camels?" So the man went inside, and while the camels were being unloaded and provided straw and fodder, water was brought for him to wash his feet until the feet of the men and the feet of the men with him. But when a meal was set before him, he said, "I won't eat until I say what I have to say." Laban said, "Speak." And he said, "I am Abraham's servant. Adonai has greatly blessed my master so that he's grown wealthy. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son when she was old, and he has given him everything he has. My master made me swear, saying, 'You are not to choose a wife for my son from among the women of the Canaanites among whom I am living. Rather, you are to go to my father's house to my kinsman to choose a wife for my son.' And I said to my master, 'Suppose the woman isn't willing to follow me?' And Abraham answered me, 'Adonai, in whose presence I live, will send his angel with you to make your trip successful. And and you are to pick a wife for my son from my kinsman in my father's house. This will release you from your obligation under my oath. But if when you come to my kinsman they refuse to give her to you, this too will release you from my oath. So today I came to the spring and said, Adonai, God of my master Abraham, if you are causing my trip to succeed in its purpose, then here I am standing by the spring. I will say to one of the girls coming out to draw water, let me have a sip of water from your jug. And if she answers, yes, drink, and I will water your camels as well, then let her be the woman you intend for my master's son. And even before I had finished speaking to my heart, there came Rivkah. Going out with her jug on her shoulder, she went down to the spring and drew water, and when I said to her, please let me have a drink, she immediately lowered the jug from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will water your camels as well. So I drank, and she had the camels drink too. And I asked her, whose daughter are you? And she answered, the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring on her nose, the bracelets on her wrists, bowed my head, prostrated myself before Adonai, and blessed Adonai, God of my master Abraham, for having led me in the right way to obtain my master's brother's daughter for his son. So now, if you people intend to show grace and truth to my master, tell me. But if not, tell me so that I can turn elsewhere. Laban and Bethuel replied, since this comes from Adonai, we can't say anything to you, either good or bad. Rivkah is here in front of you. Take her and go. Let her be your master's son's wife, as Adonai has said. And when Abraham's servant heard what they said, he prostrated himself on the ground to Adonai. And then the servant brought out silver and gold jewelry, together with clothing, and gave them to Rivkah. He also gave valuable gifts to her brother and mother. He and his men then ate and drank and stayed the night. And in the morning they got up, and he said, send me off to my master. Her brother and mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, at least 10. After that she will go. And he answered them, don't delay me, since Adonai has made my trip successful, but let me go back to my master. And they said, we will call the girl and see what she says. They called Rivkah and asked her, will you go with this man? And she replied, I will. So they sent their sister Rivkah away with her nurse, Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rivkah with these words, our sister, may you be the mother of millions. May your descendants possess the cities of those who hate them. Then Rivkah and her maids mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rivkah and went on his way. Meanwhile, Yitzhak, one evening after coming along the road from Beer Lachai, he was living in the Negev, went out walking in the field, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rivkah too looked up, and when she saw Yitzhak, she quickly dismounted the camel, and she said to the servant, who is this man walking in the field to meet us? And when the servant replied, it's my master, she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Yitzhak everything he had done, and then Yitzhak brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rivkah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus was Yitzhak comforted for the loss of his mother. Now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran, Yokshan, Midan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shwach. Yoksham fathered Shiva and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashrim, Letushim, and Lumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanoch, Avidah, and Eldaah. All these were descendants of Keturah. And Abraham gave everything he owned to Yitzhak, but to the sons of the concubines he made grants while he was still living and sent them off to the east, to the land of Kedim, away from Yitzhak, his son. This is how long Abraham lived, 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last, dying at a ripe old age, an old man full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Yitzhak and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the Cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, by Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Het. Abraham was buried there with Sarah his wife. And after Abraham died, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac lived near Beer Lahai Roi. Here is the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar, the Egyptian woman, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. The firstborn of Ishmael was Neviot, followed by Kedar, Adbeel, Mifsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, and Tema, Yatur, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael. These are their names according to their settlements and camps, 12 tribal rulers. This is how long Ishmael lived, 137 years, and then he breathed his last, died, and was gathered to his people. Ishmael's sons lived between Havilah and Shur near Egypt as you go towards Asher. He settled near all of his kinsmen. So, since it would take many generations for God's plan of redemption to be brought to fruition, and because it could only come through one genetic line, that it could only be through one of Abraham's sons, that the torch of the covenant, the line of promise, was passed forward. Which will it be? Now, God determined that this heir to the covenant, a son, would be born to Abraham's wife, Sarah. But because Abraham got impatient, because he looked at the world through the eyes of a typical pagan culture, he thought that using Sarah's handmaiden Hagar as a surrogate to give Abraham a son was a proper course of action. I mean, after all, Sarah was old. Her reproductive biological functions had ceased operating some time ago, and Hagar was young and fertile. Now, Hagar did give Abraham a son whom he was completely satisfied would do for an heir, Ishmael. But to this course of action, God said no. And in the previous Torah portion, God himself appears to Abraham, and he tells him that Sarah will give birth. Now, neither Sarah nor Abraham can fathom something so illogical. Sarah scoffed, laughed mockingly, and Abraham mostly ignored it, accepting Ishmael as that heir to the promise. This wound up with Sarah demanding that the much older Ishmael be sent away along with his mother. And in no uncertain terms, Isaac is chosen to be the heir of the line of covenant promise, and Ishmael is rejected. Ishmael goes on to become the forefather of what we can loosely call the Arabs. Isaac is Hebrew, and will later pass that torch that he had received to his son, Jacob. However, when a long time later, when a fellow named Muhammad created a new religion in the Middle East around 600 AD called Islam, the claim was made that Ishmael was the legitimate heir to Abraham, not Isaac. And so, not the Israelites. And since God promised Abraham to give him a certain land for all of his offspring, then the question becomes, but which descendant of Abraham is to be the heir to this land, Isaac or Ishmael? The reality has been the source of friction and war ever since. The Muslims say they are the heirs of the covenant promise of the land. The Jews say they are the heirs. Now, Genesis chapter 25 lays down the genealogy, the line of the covenant promise. And one living in our time would have to be living in a cave in order to not see the enormous impact this dispute has with the goings-on in Israel and the entire Muslim world today. Even the church is split over this. But many denominations say it really doesn't matter anyway, because God terminated his agreement with Israel, turned over everything that Israel had coming to them to the adherents of a new Gentile faith called Christianity. Now, because this matter has everything to do with redemption, then it is critical that we're equipped to look at the matter intellectually, honestly, and make a decision. Let's look at our holy book, the Bible, focusing on this Genesis 25, seeing what it has to say about it. See, there's a lot of information jam-packed in this chapter. And I suspect that prior to 1948, in the absolutely unthinkable fulfillment of the prophecy that Israel would be reborn as a nation of Jews, this listing of tribes coming from Abraham would have been relatively unimportant except for librarians and historians. And between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, the matter was mostly seen as an arcane debate because Israel didn't exist anymore. But now that Israel has returned to their homeland, and with the happenings of the 21st century Middle East that are shaking the whole world like never before, these genealogical listings take on a little more important tone for the church especially, as does the strange circumstances of the birth of Isaac's twin sons, Jacob and Esau, because one or the other of these would be the next in the line as heirs to that covenant God made with Abraham. Now, chapter 25 is essentially the winding up of the story of Abraham and in later verses of Ishmael, and we are given some final information about Abraham that we need to make some mental notations about. First, Abraham took on another wife, a woman named Keturah, of whom we know next to nothing. Okay? Bible scholars are not entirely clear whether or not Abraham was married to Sarah at the same time as he was Keturah. That said, after some further studying and researching, I think it's likely that we should not assume that Abraham's taking Keturah as a wife was in chronological sequence with the previous chapter of Genesis. That is, that Keturah came after Sarah. The literary device the Torah employs by interrupting the sequence of events, going back a few years, adding some new information about someone or something before proceeding again, it's not unusual for either the Bible as a whole or other writings from other cultures in that era and even eras well before and well after that time. One possibility concerning the timing of Keturah stands out above all the rest. These sons of Abraham, born through Keturah, could have been born to Abraham before Isaac's birth. This is because Abraham was far past human ability for a male to sire a child, just as it was for Sarah to produce a child when Isaac was conceived. Okay? Therefore, unless these sons from Keturah were also sort of miraculous conceptions, they had to have come well before Sarah bore the miracle baby, Isaac. Now, of course, one could argue that upon God making Abraham capable of siring Isaac, Abraham regained his fertility for an extended period of time, or even until death. Perhaps. And several scholars choose that approach. Anyway, I just want you to see that it's pretty much impossible to nail down exactly when Abraham took Keturah as a wife and when these other children were born and whether these sons came before or after Isaac. Now, we're told that Keturah gave Abraham several children, of which 6 are mentioned. We have no idea who Keturah is or who her ancestors were. As is customary in the Bible, only the male children are mentioned, but it's unthinkable that Keturah didn't also give Abraham several daughters as well. However, it is clear that the etymology of Keturah's name is the Hebrew word keteret, which means spices. And in fact, certain tribes that have long been suspected as being descendants of Abraham and Keturah were associated with the spice trade in ancient times. It's also helpful for us to know that the prime spice-producing region for the Middle East at that time and for many centuries to come was an area of southern Arabia today known as Yemen. This also shows just how extensive and regular trade and travel was among these ancient peoples so very long ago. Now, we're going to run into several of these named children of Keturah later on in Scripture, and yet others will never be heard of again. So let me point out one son in particular, because the territory he settled in would play a significant role in Moses' life, and that son is named Midian. And true to his mother Keturah's name, the Midianites were known as spice traders, particularly of the highly valued spice frankincense. Now, their territory was located on the Arabian Peninsula, bordered by the eastern edge of a finger of the Red Sea today called the Gulf of Aqaba. These are the same Midianites, the same region where Moses fled from Egypt, where God came to Moses in a burning bush, and where Moses found a wife. In fact, it is my view that the Gulf of Aqaba is the biblical Red Sea that Moses parted to lead the Israelites through to safety when they were fleeing from the armies of Pharaoh. Now, Abraham's 6 sons by means of Keturah, along with his son Ishmael by means of Hagar, the Egyptian girl, would go on to form what we can loosely call the Arab peoples, people that populated the Middle East and northern Africa. But be aware that the term Arab wasn't even valid until sometime after the reign of King David. That is, there was no such identifiable named people group as Arabs or Arabians until probably at least 900 BC, some 9 centuries after the time we're currently talking about. Now, we are told in verse 5 that Abraham gave all of his wealth and possessions to Isaac, which would have made Isaac a wealthy and powerful man. Now, this was typical because Isaac was to be considered the firstborn son, according to God. But it also most certainly set the stage for enormous jealousy and strife between Isaac and his large cadre of half-brothers and sisters, especially Ishmael. And the strife and jealousy continues to this very day. With all those brothers and sisters, dozens at least, Abraham was going to have to do something to assure that his son Isaac was decisively, without opposition, above all the rest, and given a clear path to continue along the road of covenant promise that Jehovah had ordained. And so, yet again, we have a dramatic example of the ongoing God principle of dividing, electing, and separating. And this time, the object of the division and separation is Isaac and the offspring that he would spawn. Now, after we're told in verse 5 that Abraham gave everything to Isaac, we're also told that Abraham gave gifts before he died to the sons of his concubines. Now, don't be confused. Although most Bibles say Abraham took Keturah as a wife, and sometime earlier Hagar as well, with the culture of that day, they did not gain the same family status as Sarah. These were concubines, kind of a different class of spousal partners. Exactly how this was expressed, I do not know. I suspect there would not have been any kind of marriage ceremony or typical protocol involved. Rather, there would have been a simple declaration by Abraham of their status of being added to his household and as being legitimate mothers of his children. These concubines were well treated and respected. They were not slaves and enjoyed the status of being joined to Abraham's clan. But they did not have the exalted place as a true legal wife. And so their children usually would have received lesser rights of inheritance than the sons of the true legal wife. Now, in fact, the law of that era was that it was entirely up to the father to choose which, if any, of his children from concubines that would be given an inheritance. So while Isaac got all of the inheritance and family authority, the other sons of Abraham, by means of his concubines, got gifts, like fairly substantial gifts because Abraham was so wealthy. Now, were there other concubines, other than Keturah and Hagar? Possibly. But at this point, it's unclear. Abraham then sent these sons of his concubines away to other territories. Dividing and electing always leads to separating. Always. Notice the parallel with God permitting circumstances to unfold that led to the necessary separation of Abraham from his nephew Lot. Well, in verse 7, Abraham dies at the ripe old age of 175 years. Oh, what a life Abraham lived. I mean, it would be so wonderful if each of us could have such a close and intertwined life with the Lord, and that his purposes would be played out through us. And due to the work of Messiah Yeshua, that is possible for us. We are told that Abraham was gathered to his people. This is a term far different from dying, or being buried in the ground, or went down to Sheol. This is a term that implies a sort of living reunion with those who are considered righteous, likely from the line of Seth, Noah, and Shem, who had come before him and were now dead. But it also speaks to a belief that death is not the end. A concept that from here forward will be built upon only slightly in the Old Testament scriptures, but will take on a greater meaning with the advent of Christ in the New Testament. That said, let me repeat something that I want you to watch for as we study through these Torah portions. While there is a hint of something beyond death in the statement, gathered to his people, there is no mention of going to heaven when we die. In fact, what we're told about Abraham being gathered to his people is a remnant of ancestor worship, customs and traditions. Now, I've done a fairly thorough study of death and dying in the Old Testament. And I can tell you with some confidence that what lay beyond the grave, a possible afterlife, if you would, is not discussed with any depth at all in the Old Testament. And it seems from the several and varying terms used for death and dying, all the terms being vague and general, that it was pretty fuzzy in the minds of the people of the Old Testament what an afterlife, if any, amounted to. For some Hebrews, it's obvious from Scripture that their great fear of dying without a son to carry on the family name spelled the end of their own essence as well. And in some unexplained way, a father was thought to live on through his son. Not through reincarnation, maybe living on without any kind of awareness or consciousness of it at all. You know, the idea of the human spirit or soul being a vessel of our true existence after death is also not well defined in the Old Testament. However, the thought that somehow a human would live in heaven with God simply doesn't exist. It was preposterous on its face, at least until the close of the Old Testament, about 400 BC. So we're next informed that Ishmael, and Isaac came together to bury their father. And as would have been customary when possible, the husband was buried with his wife. And Abraham was buried in the same tomb as Sarah, the Cave of Machpelah at Hebron. And later Isaac and Rebekah would join them in that same location, as eventually would Jacob. Now in verse 11, God makes it clear to any who might doubt where the line of promise led when it says that God blessed Isaac. The handing off of the torch of the covenant from Abraham to Isaac is now complete. Isaac is the new patriarch of the Hebrews. Ishmael, or any other of Abraham's sons, is not. And Abraham is but a memory. Later on, in Genesis 25, we start to deal with Isaac's sons, the twins Jacob and Esau. And we're going to see this process and principle repeated yet again. Now, the issue of who among the sons will be chosen as inheritor of the rights of the divine covenant given to Abraham, this is the crux of the matter. Put it another way. Just as with Isaac and Ishmael, as it concerns the brothers Jacob and Esau, it would be God that declares his choice of which one would be the Hebrew, the people of the line of the covenant promise, and the other not. Both Jacob and Esau were, by all physical evidence, born from their Hebrew father Isaac and the same physical mother, Rivkah. They were, after all, fraternal twins. By birth, if one went purely by physical definition, then it would seem that both were Hebrews. But no. God would again, by declaration, divide, elect, and separate. He would declare one a Hebrew, the other not. This brings up another principle that is heavily at play after Yeshua appeared on the scene and then was crucified, arose from the grave, and ascended to heaven. In the end, while genealogy, of course, plays a role, it is God who decides and declares who has the right to be heirs of the promises contained in the covenant of Abraham. And as more covenants eventually come along, in those as well. And from the outset with Abraham, typical and traditional means of determining heirs and the right to inheritance are accepted by God, but only to a point. He always reserves the right to intervene. The Ishmael-Isaac intervention and decision is a great example of this. But so is the mere fact that Gentiles, those other than for Hebrews, can be made part and beneficiaries of the Abrahamic covenant and all that it means, the line of promise that leads to redemption. However, Gentiles, do not think that our inclusion means the exclusion of others who were the originals, the natural born of that line of promise. Nor think we have taken over what was promised to a former people group. All that has happened is that we are allowed to become participants, just as Paul explains in Romans 11, 13 through 21. However, to those of you who are Gentiles, I say this: since I myself am an emissary sent to the Gentiles, I make known the importance of my work in the hope that somehow I may provoke some of my own people to jealousy and save some of them. For if their casting Yeshua aside means reconciliation for the world, well, what will their accepting him mean? It will be life from the dead. Now, if the challah offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole loaf. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, Gentiles, a wild olive, were grafted in among them and have become rich sharers in the become equal sharers in the rich root of the olive tree, then don't boast as if you were better than the branches. However, if you do boast, remember that you're not supporting the root. The root's supporting you. So you will say, well, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. True, but so what? They were broken off because of their lack of trust. However, you keep your place only because of your trust. So don't be arrogant. On the contrary, be terrified. For if God didn't spare the natural branches, he certainly won't spare you. In Paul's famous metaphor, Gentiles are wild olives that can be grafted into the rich root of the natural branches, which are the Hebrews. What's the rich root? It is God's covenants that pass down through the line of promise. And that line of promise is the route of redemption. And just as we saw from the beginning with Abraham, some pure ethnic genealogy or exact family structure or firstborn custom regularly gets overridden by God. If not for that, Gentiles would have no place in God's kingdom. Because being members of God's kingdom is what comes from our redemption, which is what comes from being part of those covenants, beginning with Abraham's.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.